We're going on safari to the islands this year, so if you're coming, get ready to go. Come on, baby, wait and see. Yes, I'm gonna take you surfing with me. Come on, baby, wait and see. Yes, I'm gonna take you surfing with me. Let's go surfing now. Everybody's learning how. Come on a safari with me. Come on a safari.
Hey guys, good evening. Good Wednesday evening. We are here live tonight. You can see Calvin over there. Calvin, we got to get you a light or something to where the light hits you different and the lighting's not coming from your window.
Yeah, I can't move my window, and this is the only place. I got a small condo. This is about it. But
Oh, okay.
nobody's tuning in to look at my ugly face anyway. They just hopefully there's some good information come out, and
Oh, yeah.
I'm taking Molly's place tonight. So
There you go. Yeah. Molly
Anyway.
and I were planning on doing a show where we were going to pick Lisa Bluder's favorite. Our favorite players from the Lisa Bluder era. That
Yeah.
won't happen tonight, but hopefully it will soon.
and you and Molly always look good no matter the lighting. So
All right, I got a couple business things to take care of before we get started. Michael Marin, where's Paul? Probably he's not on this episode tonight. He'll be on Sunday night show, so stay tuned. I think he's out there umpiring baseball games. That's what he does. Okay, so taking care of business. Please, if you haven't already liked or subscribe, do that now. You got both of them right in front of you. Hit the smash button, smash that sub button, hit the like button. Do it right now while you're thinking of it because it's right there in front of you, and you just, why not get it done? Okay.
yeah, give to the swarm, Dean.
And what's that?
Give to the swarm. That's business too. So
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Okay.
Yes,
So I didn't even wear mine tonight. I'm wearing my Hawkeye Kennick shirt. Okay.
Yeah.
All righty. So also share this, please. Please share this with everybody. Let's get this going, guys. Let's keep this going. Let's keep everything going. We try to give you some good information. We are going to have a little bit of a different format tonight than we usually are. I'm going to throw several subjects at Calvin. Calvin is going to tell us what he knows about them, what he thinks. I'm not going to say his opinion because he doesn't like that word. He doesn't have an opinion. He's a straight facts man. Am I not correct, Calvin?
Well, kind of. I'm not the type of guy that I'm going to defend somebody if they're throwing them under the bus if I think that's wrong, which I guess would be my opinion, kind of. But
yeah.
But I like to kind of stick to all the information I listen to on a daily basis in interviews and all that. So
okay. All right.
I don't like opinions.
One more piece of business, and then we're going to get into it.
Yeah.
For all you Pacer fans who are in the state of Iowa who follow the Pacers because of either the Iowa State guy or because they were from Indiana and had Connor and Caitlin connections, I just want you to know they lost to the Thunder. The Thunder is who I had hoped would win this, and they did. So, as Hawkaholic Brandon says, thunder up. Okay, I just had to throw that in there. I know there was some tense moments in that game before it got to the late in the third quarter when it took off. Okay, I got to figure out a way to set this up so I can see it better. Okay, our first subject of the night, Kelvin. I'm going to throw it right at you. Beth Goetz.
The recent news has all been seemed like pretty positive about her, what the job she's doing. Kirk thinks she's doing a great job. Ben McCollum lauds her for what she's done for him already. I think she did a good job with the softball coach. I guess the problem with the other softball coach, everybody really liked him, but he just wasn't recruiting up to par. He was offering a lot of kids that were kind of below Big Ten level, they thought. And
okay.
Seems like they got a good coach. I don't know.
She brought like 3 of them from Fresno State with her.
Yeah, and she brought in, at least one or two coaches with her from there, didn't she? I don't know.
Yeah,
The one she hired
coach for
yesterday
sure. I
was
think another coach came from another place, but
okay.
the one thing I'm impressed with is they brought in a killer pitcher who's undefeated with a 1.97 ERA. So you can't
And
go wrong with stats like that.
I think the people that Beth has gotten rid of, Brian was really when she was just an interim athletic director, and she was pretty much forced to do that. But I think it was a good move. I mean, he wasn't working out as a OC, and getting rid of Fan, that was a no-brainer. I mean, you didn't have anybody in the stands, and you couldn't get blood out of a turnip. No donors would support him and give him any nil money. So I think McCollum seems like a great hire. I don't know. And then Brad Heinrichs lauded her the other day too, and she hired his right-hand man to. He was on a podcast interviewed this week too. I can't remember his name, but and then Doctorman, he said that she brought in the best. I don't know what his title is, this Pioli guy. She said he's the best general manager, or it's not general manager, but consultant as far as how to handle, the money for all of NIL and all of sports at Iowa and the revenue sharing, how to best manage it. And he's like a Hall of Fame NFL guy, And anyway, so I think that everything's pointing towards, a lot of people hated Beth. I don't know if it's because she was a woman or because she fired Brian or how she handled that. But again, we got to give people chances, and it seems like she's doing okay.
Yeah. I can tell you why people weren't fired up about Beth. It was from her days at Minnesota when Jerry Kill had to step away because of his health, and she messed up the hiring of replacing him, and so fans were looking at that like, does she know talent when she sees it?
And again, that hire, she wasn't really the AD there. She was just she was just interim, like she was it. Everybody knows that the president of the university fired Brian. President Wilson, and I'm sure the donors and President Wilson, got rid of Fran too. But Fran was just a no-brainer at this point. But anyway,
well, speaking of, we had a little bit of a conversation on the softball coach. I know that wasn't on our agenda tonight, and how she came from Fresno State, and I think she brought an assistant with her. Do you think they consulted Brian about what life at Iowa City was like before they took the job? Because Brian's from Fresno State.
About everybody at Fresno State was from Iowa. So she played at Iowa. She coached at Iowa. The defensive specialist she just brought in is she from Tiffin or something? High school, played at Iowa. A lot of Iowa, Gail Blevins people. It's nice to have Gail Blevins people back at Iowa where we go to 3 World Series.
She was very complimentary on the new hire, by the way.
I just mentioned the softball coach. I don't know much about it. I just mentioned it because that was under the subject of Beth.
Yeah. Well, you've already brought up Pioli a little bit, Scott. Is there anything
I want to talk about his background. Him and Kirk were at the Cleveland Browns together with Ozzie Newsome when the Cleveland Browns moved to Baltimore. The owner of Baltimore took Ozzie Newsome and Pioli to run the front office, and the one assistant coach he took that I know of was Kirk Ferentz. So Pioli and Ferentz have been together for a long time. And a lot of people don't know, but Ferentz was very involved with Newsome and Pioli. Who would they draft? And they'd ask Kirk, what do you think of this prospect? And Kirk would say, well, draft Jonathan Ogden, please. He's a Hall of Famer, and Kirk called up the Ravens and told them to draft Marshall Yanda. You know, Kirk has so many contacts network wise, you know, to the NFL. So that's the contact, and of course, Pioli, the Ravens won the Super Bowl, and then he goes to New England and they win like, I don't know, 4 or 5 Super Bowls while he's there, you know, and then the other thing that I thought was interesting to talk about Pioli was 2 of his best close friends are Kirk Ferentz, of course, at Iowa, and Beth Goetz. He was involved with Beth Goetz when she was at Connecticut as an assistant AD, you know, helping her with, she was the CEO of the women's basketball program at UConn, and he was involved with that. And I thought that was interesting that in his talks with Doctorman, he said two of the main reasons he came to Iowa was because Kirk Ferentz, of course, and then he goes, and Beth Goetz. You know, that was really interesting to me. Who dreamt that? You know, that there was a connection. So
I didn't even know about the connection until you just talked about it. So yeah, just trying to change things up a little bit, give a different look tonight, guys. Alrighty. Next up is the Swarm. You know, just before you get started with that, the University of Iowa started a new program. Well, they're re-pushing the old program that they started before the Swarm was invented, called Flight. And so, is the Swarm going to survive? Is the Swarm supposed to survive?
Well, I sent you the Brad's podcast that he did, his interview, and the Swarm is the same as it always has been. Flight is about revenue sharing and Beth raising donor money to help, and also with facilities. But the Swarm's the other part. Yeah. You know, setting up corporations for NIL and donors. Yeah. But that was a very interesting interview Brad had on there about that. He said, Swarm ain't going no place. He said it'll probably be a year before we actually know from the NCAA, because they're so slow, as to what we need to do to be compliant as far as this clearinghouse. Are we still going to be
$600 or less?
You know, he said, I was about ready to tell him, just tell everybody if they're going to give $1 million, make it in $600 donations and just give it the way you want to. But anyway, that wouldn't work. But he said he didn't know if they'd still be able to, you know, just give kids money, you know, to go sign autographs at the casinos. You know, what will be allowed? That's a great question mark, you know.
Yeah. Well, as we know that the NIL was started out to be where, like, somebody could advertise for a local donut shop or a local car dealership, something like that. It was never meant to be a pay for play, which it has become. You know.
And if it, as you have said on your pods, you're afraid it's going to all go underground again, and the good old SEC, the good old SEC will be beating us in bowl games instead of us beating them all. You know, the Big Ten was 5-1 against the SEC last year in bowl games. And the SEC
now that things are going back under the table,
it might. Who knows? But Brad made the point. Brad made the point in his that interview he did for the podcast. I can't even remember who did it, but maybe, I don't know. But anyway, he said that he's not Swarm. He said NIL worked perfect the way it was supposed to with Caitlin Clark. She didn't take any Swarm money. She didn't take any just gifts of money. She was just hired by corporations, you know. So like you were supposed to be.
Yeah. Oh, he says that he did that interview with Condon. Guys, can I tell you, when he does the interviews with like Brad Heinrichs and K. Kirk or Dockerman, that is actually taken from his radio show earlier in the day or the day before.
Yep.
And if you notice that the person asking the questions most of the time is not Condon, it's Mike. It's what's his name? Somebody Miller. I can't think of his first name.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So
Yep.
just
They
so
used to
that
have
you
a
guys
TV.
know that.
Used to have when I first started listening to Trent, he had a TV show every day for a couple hours with that Miller and then another guy who happened to be a crook. But
Oh yeah, God. Well, that was Ken Miller. It's Ken Miller, and that he was the one that was partnered with the crook, and even Ken Miller got duped by this guy, by this crook who's now in jail, I think.
This guy was scalping tickets. He was from Boston, Massachusetts, and moved to Iowa. But I ain't gonna say more about it because I don't want to get a libel suit against me. So Trent does I think Trent does a very even-handed, job. Obviously, he calls a lot of high school games. He's a good announcer, and I think Trent's pretty good. Nobody's perfect, but
no, he's fine. He called me out on my he actually watched my podcast one day and called me out, and so we've become buddies since then.
Yeah.
Okay, so Hink, we're gonna talk basketball a little down the line, so if you wouldn't mind, don't go away. We'll get to your question on that later. Guys, on the questions, if we get a question or a comment come up on a current subject we're talking about, we're going to hold it until we get done with that current subject. And before we move on, we'll talk about the question or the comment you had. If you guys don't mind doing it that way, we'd appreciate it. Okay.
The only other thing I can say about Swarm, which I was going to talk about when I got to Kirk Ferentz, was that in the Doctorman interview, Doctorman and when Swarm started up, when Brad took it over, Ferentz tried to get the athletic department behind it, and they really didn't, to Kirk's satisfaction. So he got behind it, So Brad's very appreciative of what Kirk has done to help him. So
yeah, I looked at that Doctorman article, and I'm going to tell you, that was nice to see that because I was kind of questioning whether or not he was 100% behind it or not. It turns out he was more than 100% behind it, and he's now that we're going to talk about Kirk, moving on. I know that probably one of the things you wanted to say about how excited he is about this new era of college football, right?
Yeah, he likes the NFL model, and we're going kind of into an NFL model. He'd rather see a salary cap, and have the regulations that the NFL does, but they have to have antitrust legislation passed by Congress, and I don't really see Congress doing that. Maybe they will, but the thing out of the Doctorman interview that just struck me, and I told Dean a year ago, when Dean was kind of perturbed that, oh my God, Jose Epinesa is going to go to Miami or he's going to Mizzou. And I said, no, he's going to Iowa. This was for a whole month. Everybody thought he was going to Missouri or Miami. And I go, don't worry about it.
Can I defend myself on that real quick?
No, that's what everybody said.
I need to tell you why I thought that. And
that's what everybody said. Yeah.
Yeah, it's because the On3 site, which you got me turned on to, and now I pay for it.
Yeah.
They had a prediction, and that prediction was like 80% to Miami. And I thought, okay, so this site must be legit. If they feel that he's 80% leaning that way, that must be what he's truly leaning. Well, as we know now, that stuff was bull crap, and I don't think they even do predictions anymore.
It's like nobody knew that this Thomas kid that just committed. The On3 sites had him going 60% to Nebraska, 30% to Iowa State. And he pretty much knew a year ago that he liked Iowa, Beth. He just never told anybody.
Is that the kid that has a brother at Nebraska?
No, this is Case and Thomas, who just I put in that.
Yeah.
Remember, I put in the headline, Iowa came from behind, and you go, no, in the article it said he was committed for a year, which he wasn't committed, but
But he knew for a year
knew.
that he was going to Iowa.
Well, he didn't. He kind of knew it,
Mhm.
But anyway, back to Epinesa.
Mhm.
A year ago, I told you, don't worry, he's coming to Iowa. And I knew he was coming to Iowa. And then I told you, you guys that think Kirk is going to retire this year, I said, I know that Epinesa is coming to Iowa and Kirk is going to coach him the rest of his career at Iowa, which is probably going to be 3 years, just like his brother. But the reason I brought that up was in the Doctorman article, Kirk said, if you told me in 1999 the odds of me being at Iowa 5 years from now, he said, the odds are way better in my mind of me being at Iowa 5 years from now than in 99.
Yeah.
Kirk says, I feel great. I don't know. Kirk could get cancer in 2 years and be done.
Anything could happen. Yeah, anything can happen in that frame of mind.
Even Doctorman today in the podcast I sent you, he's saying, he says, Kirk is probably a year or two from now, they're going to give him, add a couple of years to his contract just for recruiting purposes.
Well, I think they already added a year because he went from 29 to 30.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
I noticed that in the article because it was always 2029 and now it's 2030. So I think they quietly added a year to his contract.
When you have a football coach, you can't have a football coach that only has a contract for only 1 or 2 more years, because then recruits are going to say, oh, he's going to be gone.
Oh, yeah. Well, they're already using it against him, his fellow coaches.
Well, they've been using it against him for 10 years. They started using it against him when he was 60, and now he's 70 and he's in better shape now than when he was 60 because he works out twice a day now. I mean, watch him run onto the field. My God, he could beat me in a wind sprint any day of the week,
Right now, and for another month, he and I are the same age. And damn it, I wish I looked as good as he was.
Oh, yeah.
He looks great.
So are you 69?
I just turned 69 and he's about to turn 70. So
we
have 2 full months every year. We're the same age.
I hope both of you live a long, long time. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And I like doing this.
That's what struck me when Kirk just said, I asked Mary for permission. Can I keep coaching? And she goes, you better.
Yes.
She goes, I don't want you in the house. He says, I have no hobbies,
Yeah, that's crazy. Because that means he devotes all of his time to football. We don't see him on the golf course with the other coaches or players or anything.
Yeah. And then, I don't need to go into another subject, but it's like Tim Lester divulging that he don't want to be a head coach. Because he loves to golf. He don't like to recruit. He likes to golf every day and stuff. If you're a head coach, how do you have hobbies? You get into the office at 4:30 in the morning and you leave at midnight or 1 every day.
Yeah.
That's what you do. You have to fundraise. You have to fundraise. You have to recruit. You have to run the portal. You have to babysit 100 and what is it? It's going to be 105 now, but it used to be 130 kids. You have to keep your eye on them or try to, and you have to make a practice schedule every day. And
he probably eats carrot sticks all night long, where somebody like Brett Belima from Illinois probably eats burgers all night long while he stays.
That was cool. Bielema's lost 75 pounds.
Oh, he has.
And his goal is to lose another 50. And I'm glad, because I love Brett Bielema. I love all Hawkeyes. I love Deacon Hill, because he played for my Hawks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want him to be our quarterback, but I love Bielema. He's a great Hawkeye, and I want him to live a long time, a year ago at this time, I'd say that Kirk was going to coach as long as Brett lived, because Brett looked awful.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
all Hawkeye fans should love Brett. But
yeah, he probably went to the doctors and got some of those warnings that I get. Better start taking care of yourself.
I'm sure they've been warning him that for a long time, but I bet he got, those injections in your stomach, like Ozempic and everything that
they're too expensive, but he can afford them. I did that for about 6 months, but it got to the point where when January 1st rolled around, I couldn't afford to do it because they tripled in price on me.
Yeah.
So I had to quit.
Yeah. Well, if you're on Medicare, if I know we're getting off subject, if you're on Medicare, if your income is low enough, you can get it for free.
Well, no, we aren't
going to talk about your income. So
no, we're not going to talk about my income, but I will say this: it has nothing to do with my income. I'm on Medicare. It has everything to do with other things. I won't get into boring people because I spent a lot of
this podcast will be
time and a lot of money in meds.
This podcast will be way long if we talk about Ozempic all night. But then Bielema, the other thing that he said in the interview was that there's like this was 6 months ago. He said there was 4 teams in the Big Ten that spent $35 million on NIL. And
I think we know what 4 teams those are.
He said just in football, and he listed them. He said Indiana, Oregon, Ohio State, and Michigan. He didn't list Michigan, but Michigan should have been on there because they got that. They gave $10 million to a quarterback.
Yeah.
But
12 million.
But now, since then, Illinois got a bunch of money. His donors ponied up. So.
Okay. Yeah, they're serious about winning at Illinois. I'm glad we don't play him this year. I don't know if I want to play.
I want to. Where I live in the Quad Cities, it's like 70% Iowa fans, 30% Illinois fans, and boy, is it a rivalry.
I'll bet.
And it's a cutthroat rivalry. I've never could understand why Iowa and Illinois in my whole lifetime, except for that short period of time where you played everybody in the Big Ten. There's a lot of times we only play Illinois like once every 5 years. I could never understand it.
Yeah.
He
wants to know if we've seen the 26 schedule. I know it's a little off topic, but let's go look at it real quick.
Okay.
Okay. I know of all the ways I go.
I think we play Northern Illinois and UNI next year, and Iowa State in the non-conference.
Oh, they don't have. There it is. No, they don't have our 26 schedule posted. So
it's posted because I commented on it on Corey Brady's podcast yesterday.
Yeah,
the guy on there, he said Northern Illinois is a joke, and I said, well, Northern Illinois beat Notre Dame last year. It's like Northern Illinois beats somebody about every year that they an upset.
All right. Well, I can't find it. It's not listed on the official Hawkeye website.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But
okay, so Hink says it's like the Big Ten West, but add the West school. Do we have all of them?
No, we play 2 West Coast schools a year. Next year we'll play the teams that we played last year, UCLA and Washington. We'll go to Washington and we'll have UCLA at home. That's the way it works.
Yeah. Speaking of the Quad Cities, Iowa has a new radio partner in the Quad Cities.
Some little dinky station, 107.7 or something. The people in the Quad Cities that live 80 miles away or something aren't real happy because they don't have a lot of wattage. But Anyway, they're in Erie, Illinois or something. I don't know.
Alrighty.
Anyway, we should
just
get
have
back to our
Michigan. Yeah,
subject.
we'll go back to our. We'll come back to that. That's actually a good thing. I'll find it later and find out what exactly it is. Let's go back to our next topic, which is Lester.
Yeah, Lester I've heard 3 podcasts with him on. One thing that was very interesting here, just sharing facts, was his hiring process. You know, he didn't get hired till February, and everybody thought, what is going on? You know, how come he didn't hire Philbin? How come Christ, you know, and here it kind of comes to fruition that Kirk was waiting for Lester the whole time. He wanted the West Coast or Shanahan offense because he liked it, you know, and he waited around to Lester. He wouldn't contact Lester till after the last Green Bay playoff game, which in the NFL, you don't talk to an NFL coach about anything until their season's over. Lester said,
you have to get permission to speak to him anyway, even if the season is over.
Wow.
But he does talk about the story.
This is how it happened, according to Lester. You know, Kirk has a bunch of friends in the Green Bay organization, you know. But anyway, Lester says, the game got over on a Saturday, and that night my agent calls and said, did you know the Iowa offensive coordinator position was open? And Lester's pretty busy with the NFL. And he goes, yeah, I heard that, but ain't it been filled yet? He said it opened like in November. And he goes, well, you're going to get some phone calls. And Jerry Montgomery called him. The running backs coach at Green Bay, Sherman's his name. It's spelled Sirman. He played for Kirk at Maine. He's been at Green Bay for like 10 years. And, Philbin, all of them told him, you're going to hear from Kirk Ferentz. Next morning, Kirk Ferentz calls him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Kirk was waiting around all this time because that was all the friends of his at Green Bay kept recommending Tim Lester.
Yeah.
You know,
but here's my question.
I thought that was interesting.
If he wasn't considering anybody else, why was he seen taking these people out for breakfast and pictures of these guys?
What if Dean? What would he do if Lester said, no, I'm not interested, I like the NFL? You got to be talking to other people.
Yeah.
You know, that would have been, it'd been crazy to just put your hopes on one guy. But Lester said that Kirk told him that he wanted try this system in college football, which nobody does. And anyway, I thought that was interesting testimony.
Well, I'll tell you what, Lester has got me so fired up every time I hear him talk. I'm ready to suit up and play for him.
I wish Dean I'd have been in favor of Lester early on. Oh, I was, wasn't I? I'm sorry.
Yes, you were.
I was the only guy that you could find that wanted Tim Lester.
Well, even the media people were angry.
Well, that's because they don't
leading the charge.
I keep telling you that Kagert was pretty right. You know, they said Philbin's going to be hired, and Kagert said, nah, don't think so. Then they said, well, Kurt offered the job to Christ, and Kagert said no. He said that they both danced around each other, but it never got to that point. Mm-hmm. And then Listico and several other people we know said that, oh, that Johns guy, he's hired. He was actually hired, you know. And Kagert come out and he just commented and he said, no, Kirk likes this guy named Tim Lester. And I knew who Tim Lester was because I used to write football recruiting. He was like one of the top quarterbacks in the country, and he was from Wheaton. And I wanted him to come to Iowa because I thought, oh, another Wheaton quarterback like Chuck Long, you know.
I think it was a Sunday morning. I believe Jason posted in our chat group. He goes, guys, what do you think of the name Johns? Get used to it. Yeah, and then I had to tease him. I go, Jason, guess what?
Well, I just listened. I got to give credit to Caker, that
Mhm.
he didn't go along with everybody. He don't report just to be reporting, and he said, nah, I think I've heard that this Kirk really likes this Tim Lester guy, and it was funny that I knew who he was. And I thought, do we want him as a coach? And then after it was announced, and I took like a day to kind of research it and stuff, and a lot of stuff, false narratives were put out about him that they at Syracuse they couldn't even get the signal right, which was the opposite. He fixed that, and then people would say he was going to run the Western Michigan offense at Iowa, and I said no, not according to Lester. He's going to run his Elmhurst offense. At Western Michigan, they wouldn't let him run his offense.
Okay.
That was the only time that he got to fully run his own offense was when he was at Elmhurst, and he was the only college coach running the Shanahan offense back then in 2010, 11, and 12.
He might be the only one doing it now.
Well, Bieniemy did at UCLA last year, but he's gone. Bieniemy's just a running back coach in the NFL now. But anyway,
UCLA,
but it was interesting. Lester telling all that stuff. He was anyway.
Well,
I liked Lester's testimony and Kirk said this, during the spring. He said, we don't do much hitting in the spring, and we don't do much hitting. Kirk used to have his practices were very physical, and like 5-6 years ago, they quit it because it just wasn't good for the health of the players. And he said, the only real live hitting we do is for the scout teams, scout team practice. So that was interesting. And then Lester said what he really loved about Kirk was at the end of every practice. I don't know if he said Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. They have like the last, I don't know if it's half hour of practice. All the guys that don't get 1 and 2 reps do a developmental scrimmage.
They call it Devo.
Yeah. So you listened. Yeah.
Yeah,
and it was like it gave a chance for, let's say, Stratton last year or Marco, whoever wasn't, whoever, first string quarterback gets 85% of the reps, and then the second string might get 15%. And these other quarterbacks are learning nothing. They're just fodder for the scout teams. And well, they really are. That's the way Chuck Long, his first year at Iowa, he was fodder for the scout team. He got to get beat up by Bobby Stoops and Andre Tippett.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was interesting. I had no clue about that.
I didn't either.
Yeah.
So what did you think of the part about where Lester and Long talked about their Wheaton days?
Oh yeah.
You like that?
Well, yeah.
For those of us who've been to Wheaton, I would say that part of it was a little boring for me.
I thought it was pretty cool. He invited Chuck Long, come over to the quarterback room sometime. And I just thought to myself, well, Lester's got 11,000 yards passing in his career. Gronowski already has a 10,000 with another year to go. And Chuck Long at the time was the second quarterback in the history of the NCAA to hit 10,000 yards when he was at Iowa.
I think
that's a lot of yards.
I think he's got 11,000.
No, Chuck's got 10,000. I looked it up. 10,320.
Okay.
And Doug Flutie was the only guy that had more than him when they graduated. Now there's guys that throw like for BYU and stuff that throw for 7,500 yards in 1 year. So
I will say this, I think hands down, we all chose Brad Banks as our Kirk Ferentz era quarterback. I do believe that Chuck Long would be the Hayden Fry era quarterback.
Chuck Long is the greatest quarterback in the history of Iowa. Brad Banks was what you call a 1-year guy. Chuck Long was a 5-year guy.
Yeah.
You can't compare a 3-time All-American to a guy that did it 1 year,
Yeah.
And
But,
Chuck Long, by the way, I know recruiting, right? Chuck Long was the lowest in all the years I followed Iowa recruiting from about Hayden's first, second year on. Chuck Long was the lowest ranked quarterback recruit that ever signed with Iowa for a scholarship. And he's the best quarterback that Iowa's ever.
quarterback.
So,
yeah.
And Hayden had a lot of good quarterbacks. When you start rating quarterbacks, Dean, this is the way I look at it. You better find a guy that was first team All Big Ten. Chuck was 4-time first team All Big Ten. Kenny Payne and Randy Duncan, they were Big Ten most valuable players for Evachevsky. Some of these other wannabe quarterbacks that people rank up there as their favorite, they better been better than honorable mention All Big Ten.
Yeah.
It's like, that's the way I look at it. Another interesting thing
where do you put Chuck Hartleb? I put him right behind Chuck Long.
I don't know. It's like hard after Chuck, I might put, I don't know. Chuck's right there, and Matt Rogers and Randy Duncan and Kenny Payne. People don't even know who Kenny Payne is anymore.
Or Randy Duncan.
I know. Matt Rogers was won the silver football at Iowa in the Big Ten as the MVP. There's a lot of good quarterbacks. Brad Banks. Just because Brad did it for 1 year doesn't mean he's not one of the greatest quarterbacks. It's like everybody's going to talk about Sean Green. Well, he only did it for 1 year, as a running back.
1 year.
But that's why I said the other night, you guys, that was a great podcast. You guys picking your favorite Ferentz players. But, when nobody picked Liddell Betts, I thought, you're crazy. He had almost 4,000 yards rushing with no offensive line.
Yeah. He was He was on my list.
And then he goes to the NFL and has like 4,000 yards rushing. He was USA Today first team All-American coming out of high school. I don't know if it's Blue Springs, Kansas, or I don't remember where it was. He was down around Kansas City. But what a great player. And, Drew Tate, Brad Banks, Stanzi, Bethard, great player. Stanley, I know I got to mention Stanley or Jason's going to be mad at me, So, all really good quarterbacks. I just think I always put Stanley down a little bit because his completion percentage wasn't real good. He wasn't the most accurate guy on deep passes or really any type of pass, but a great player,
How'd you say Kenny Payne is Payne?
Yeah, Ploen.
Yeah, he was on the 56 team.
And he was pissed off at the NFL, so he went to the CFL.
Mm-hmm. This is the 1956 yearbook from the Hawkeyes.
Yeah.
My dad was a Hawkeye in 56, was good friends with Alex Karras, who's in this book. And Alex Karras signed it to me. I was born in 1956.
Cool.
And as a baby, my dad's nickname was Mouse, and so his friends named me Mickey. And I got signature in here. But I just thought I wanted to see who the quarterback was in 56, because I was thinking that's who it was.
Another thing that Lester mentioned, and then it was in that podcast I sent you, where isn't a new running back coach named Walker?
That doesn't sound right. But
I don't know.
Like to talk about the new running back coach?
Yes. I thought it was interesting that again, and people, I just can't get over people. You know, every time a new coach comes to Iowa, it's like, oh, he's awful. You know,
Omar's his name. First name is Omar.
isn't it Omar Walker?
I don't know what his
Maybe
last
not.
name is.
Yeah, but anyway, the thing is, you know, a wide receiver coach job openings. Everybody says, well, hire Tim Dwight. You know, running back coach opens. Well, hire Tavian Banks. Hire Albert Young. Well, Kirk goes out and finds the best coach he can find.
Yeah. Well, first of
You
all,
know?
out of everybody you mentioned, the only one who's actually coaching is Albert Young.
Yeah,
I don't think
know.
the rest of those guys are coaching anywhere.
I don't know, but those are the way fans think.
Yeah.
You know, let's hire some ex-Hawkeye. You know, well, why don't you do it the right way? You know, interview people. And Kirk found a guy that knows, and Lester found him too, because he had all these connections to Green Bay and the Shanahan offense. You know, Liddell Betts could not understand that offense last year. He just coaches the running backs. You know, it's nice. Like he said today, it's nice to have the backup tight end coach. They brought him in, and this running back coach. They know all the terminology of the offense already, which helps everybody.
Right.
You know.
Well,
but I thought that was interesting that Walker. Again, he mentioned that Sherman guy from Green Bay, the running back coach, that he coached under him, you know, and Montgomery again, Jerry Montgomery, the ex-Packer coach and defensive lineman for Kirk. You know, he told Kirk about this.
I think Jerry
Omar
Montgomery.
Guy.
I think Omar Young.
Omar Young. There you go.
Yeah, yeah. I knew Walker wasn't right, but I just let you go on because I didn't know the right name either.
Yeah, I said Walker. Is that his name? I don't know, but it doesn't matter. The whole key
Jerry
was
Montgomery, I believe, is a Waterloo boy out of Waterloo, Iowa.
I don't think so.
I could be wrong. I could have the wrong one.
Boy, he was a 300-pound defensive lineman, and his boy, they ought to call him Headstone or Tombstone. He's the backup to Jaden Harrell, and nobody talks about him. But I heard Seth Wallace say that, boy, he's like if you're a kid running through a graveyard in the dark, Dean.
Mm-hmm.
You're a kid running through the graveyard in the pitch dark, and all of a sudden you run into a headstone and it knocks you on your rear end.
You're running your ass the other way as fast as you can go.
No, it's that it knocks you cold. He said that's what Montgomery does. That's what Jerry Montgomery's boy does at practice. He's a middle linebacker, and boy, when he hits you, you're done. You're done. You know, it's like running into a headstone. You know. And nobody talks about Jaden Montgomery when they talk about who could play at middle linebacker this year. But
yeah, you're actually right because nobody brings that up sometimes.
But everybody wants to talk about some sparkly recruit, you know. But
okay,
what's our next subject?
Okay, hang on for a second. I just want to say I was wrong. I got the wrong Jerry Montgomery. Mm-hmm. I believe there was another one that played for Iowa under Hayden Fry, but this one played for Kirk, and he's out of Mesquite, Nevada. No wonder Hayden went on.
He's from the same place that Nick Bell was from. That's where Hayden had his home in the offseason was out there in Mesquite, New Mexico, or Nevada.
Nevada. Yeah. I want to tell you a little secret. When I drove through there for my daughter's wedding, because she got married in Vegas, I tried to find Hayden's house.
Yeah. Well,
it's not publicly listed, or it wasn't.
Yeah. Well, I have a good friend that I went to high school with that lived pretty close to him on that retirement golf course.
The other person I think you were trying to get figured out, Warren
Ruggiero. Okay. I'm real good at pronouncing names. So.
Okay. Is that the tight ends coach, assistant coach?
No, he's the new offensive analyst.
Okay.
He's doing, and that's another thing Lester talked about, how important that job was. That's what Lester did for Green Bay. Offensive analyst, but Lester's job, which is exactly the same as Ruggiero, and he asked Kirk to hire an offensive analyst to do this job, and Ruggiero lost his job, so he wanted to hire him. Was what this offensive analyst does is study from Thursday through Sunday. No, during the prior week before the game, he looks at the other team's
Defense, I believe.
defense, and their defense, and he breaks down for 7 days or something how you beat that defense, what their tendencies are, and then he gives that on Sunday morning. He gives it to Lester and the other coaches. He said otherwise Lester had to start on Sunday morning looking at the other team's defense and figuring out a good way to attack it.
Right.
And so this is all set up for Ruggiero. Ruggiero sets it up for him, and it's brilliant by Tim Lester. He wanted to hire somebody that did his job at Green Bay.
Yeah. Well, after Omar Young, you have listed Succession. I'm not sure what you meant by Succession.
I wanted to also mention that Lester lauded the guy that everybody hates, Bud Meyer, for the great job he's doing with the wide receivers. All of a sudden our wide receiver room is like 8-9 deep. And Lester says that Bud Meyer taught him how to read the coverage on the defense and change their pattern and everything. And
one thing about that is I think all those wide receivers could play. I just told you who I thought like my top 6 were going to be, because that's how they're going to be listed on a 2 deeps.
Yeah, I'm just saying that people like to hate Barnett and hate Budmeyer for as soon as they're hired, and because things don't turn around that day. And
well, do you want to talk about Barnett and Barnes? Barnett and Bud Meyer.
Barnett. It's like Budmeyer and Barnett. It's like
the two most hated guys that we didn't like to hire.
Well, I think so. I wasn't crazy over the Budmeyer hire, but I said on that Lester podcast, I said, give him a chance. He's never coached on the field at Iowa.
Yeah.
He was just a guy that sat up in the booth, and he couldn't even coach the quarterbacks when he was with Brian or anything. He just told Brian what his thoughts were and all that shit.
Brian was in over his head, and everybody knows that.
Well, yeah. And like I commented on your podcast the other night,
didn't help him.
Well, I don't think the offensive coordinator needs any help from the head coach. The head coach don't call the plays. Kirk never designed an offense in his life. It's like Brian's offense was his offense, and people can say that ain't true, but it's true. Yeah. Brian's offense was different. And I have to say, like I said on your podcast, I said it in a comment, and you guys didn't mention it or anything. Somebody said, Kirk, knifed hurt his boy, or something like that. And I said, well, my opinion was Brian's offense wasn't bad until we didn't have an offensive line. In 2020, we averaged 32 points a game, second in the Big Ten. I'm glad Brian's gone, but I'm just saying, when Brian quit coaching the offensive line and everything, and then we had this disastrous recruiting classes in the offensive line because of retirements and devastating injuries and everything, you can't do anything. Mike Leach couldn't win an 11-11 football game with no offensive line.
You have to remember, Brian's successor on the line went to North Dakota State.
Well, he went to Colorado
That was
State.
The beginning of the disaster.
Well, I think the real disaster, Polasek is a good coach, but he had never coached offensive line in his life. He was a quarterback coach, and they hired him to be the offensive line coach. Maybe he was good at it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I know all of a sudden, all them recruits and all of a sudden you're playing 18-year-old Connor Colby.
Yeah.
And 18-year-old Mason Richmond and Bo Stevens.
Those guys, they were not ready.
All of them at the same time. And there's no way they didn't even know the plays. Logan Jones said he didn't even know what to do, but he was the only guy. They pulled him over from defensive line. It was like Barnett said, when Kirk interviewed him, he told George, he said, we have nobody. The cupboard is bare.
You need to rebuild it. Hey, I'm going to do a quick commercial, then we'll finish. All right. That is our Villains Network, which we're a part of. And so I'd just like to say they're going to upload a new break on that because I'm not on there. And a couple of new shows that we've added to the network are not on there. So soon there will be a new commercial for that.
And I know one subject I skipped over was succession.
Yeah, I asked you about that.
Everybody wants to know when Kurt does leave, what do you think is going to happen? Which I don't know. Beth is a very strong AD. She is not going to just say, oh, it's going to be LeVar or Seth. Lester says he don't want to be a head coach. Seth did a podcast the other day, and LeVar have both said in the past that they'd like to be a head coach at some point. You know, you don't want them to leave Iowa. It would be nice if they want to be a head coach at some point. They go get a head coaching job at South Dakota or Miami, Ohio, or someplace, and get it on their resume. Because that's why Kirk was hired. He was the only guy that Bowlesby interviewed, and Stoops got hired by Oklahoma the day before they were going to hire Kirk. Terry Allen and Kirk were the only guys that had head coach on their resume. So it helps to have it on their resume. But Beth's going to do a nationwide search pulling from everybody she knows. Pioli,
okay. No, we don't even know if Beth will be here in 2030.
Well, she will be. There's almost no way unless she wants to go to a bigger job. I mean, she ain't going to get fired by then. Unless she did something awful, embezzled money or something. ADs don't get fired very quickly. It's like Bump Elliott struggled as an AD his first freaking 8 years, and then finally hired Lute and Hayden. So
all right. What about Tyler Barnes? He's next on your list.
No, I want to say succession.
Okay.
The point on succession, obviously Seth and LeVar are the two guys on the coaching staff that will be interviewed. Lester doesn't want to be a head coach, he says. I believe it. And I don't think he's a guy that wants to do all the work as a head coach. He wants to call plays. That's what he said.
Phil Parker no longer does not want to be a head coach either.
Who?
Phil Parker doesn't want to be a head coach either.
And he's too old.
Yeah.
You got LeVar and Seth. I think they're the only two reasonable people from the staff. And then you'll have guys that have Iowa ties like Polasek, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't know if Polasek left Iowa You know, he's fairly young. The best young coach to me in the college football is the coach at Arizona State. But he's an alum of Arizona State. Might not be able to get him to leave. I like the guy named Fish at Washington. Very good coach every place he's went. You know, he went on 4th down way too many times against Iowa. Oh, stupid. But anyway, and then of course everybody's might look into Campbell at Iowa State. But the other guy that would be a very good hire is Kalen DeBoer at Alabama, because I think he'll be fired by the time Ferentz gets out.
And so do we want him?
He's a damn good coach, and he's from Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
He's and I think he coached at one of them Dakota schools and everything. And some of the other good coaches are just too old. You know, I know you like the guy at Kansas State and stuff, but he's going to be too old. Chris Kleiman, whatever his name.
He's getting there. I just liked when.
But I think Seth will be it.
Benson and I went to the game where North Dakota State beat us, and Kleiman was the coach, I believe, at the time.
Great coach.
We listened to his post-game presser. He knew more about Iowa than Iowa knew about Iowa. That's why he knew that they were going to win.
Isn't he from Cedar Falls or Waterloo or something?
Waterloo. Yeah, he coached at both UNI and Columbus, Waterloo, Columbus High School.
But that's my thinking on succession.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I think it's going to be Seth. I mean, Barnett on his podcast the other day, he says, when I come into Iowa, he says, I was so impressed with Kirk, of course. Everybody's impressed with Kirk, every recruit, every coach, you know, most of the coaches all around the nation, you know, they're impressed with Kirk, you know, because he's a solid guy and there's no messing around, you know. But then he said, I looked at the linebacker room and that was the best run, best relationship room in the building. And he said, I wanted to build my offensive line room like the linebacker room. So that's why I think, you know, Seth must be pretty damn impressive. But that's all I wanted to say about succession. What's the next subject?
Tyler Barnes.
I don't even remember he had a podcast too. And then Cakert's having a podcast with him that's probably coming out like tomorrow or the next day or something. But
I know Kakert said he's got a busy week or podcast, or was that Dockerman?
Kakert does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, tomorrow's all the Nebraska women's basketball media day kind of. Yeah. They're going to get to interview players.
I think two of them are missing. I don't think two of them are even there right now. We know Hannah.
No,
Hannah's
but
gone.
They said today they're going to get to watch practice for like a half hour of the 2-hour practice. And then the 3 players that are available for interviews are Stremlow, McCabe, and somebody else. I don't remember who it was. But
yeah. And you know what?
I'm sorry it's not Callie Levine. But
okay, but she gave me enough today on her podcast. That was great. She needs to
sent that to you. I sent that to you because I know you'd want to watch it, you know.
Yeah. Jada, after Jada graduates this year, I think they should give that podcast to Callie. I think she can do it.
Probably will. I'm sure Jada that's part of her nil deal with Swarm is people complain about. I think it's crazy. People complain about Lucy Olson putting up dancing videos and stuff, but that's part of their nil contract. You know, promote Iowa basketball by posting on TikTok and Instagram and all that stuff. So Jada sure has a great personality, and so does Callie.
Yeah, they both kind of like. It's kind of like one's leaving and one's here, going to take over Jada's spot on the bench, cheerleader role.
Yeah,
you know. But I was glad to see that the write-up that they talked about the women's. Is that they're not automatically relegating Callie to the bench this year.
No.
They're saying that she has a chance if she works her butt off to play.
Every coach, for the most part, except some some of these places, which I don't respect. Every coach, Ben McCollum, and I think Lisa and Jan and Kirk, they don't have you compete for your position, and they gave Callie Levine a scholarship for a reason. They didn't give her a scholarship to say, "Oh no, we're not going to give you a chance." She's a good player. So
She is.
What's our next subject? I don't even remember what was interesting there. But
Okay. The recruits. You wanted to talk about the recruits. I don't know if that's football, basketball, or what you got.
Well, both.
Okay.
But the football, we have 2 walk-ons, Dean Oliver's boy and Josh Daniels. And some people said Oliver's recruit. He runs a 4.49 40, which is pretty good for his weight and stuff. And some people say he's a wide receiver, but Kakert kind of intimated that maybe they're thinking of him as a cash guy.
Yeah.
And then
We don't want
Daniels
to forget
runs
the prize recruit this weekend.
Well, just a minute. I'm going over the walk-ons first.
All righty. Okay.
There's only 2 of them. The other one's Josh Daniels. He runs a 4.46 40. And he's a safety, cornerback, cash type guy. Then we go over to the recruits that are committed. Schaefer and DeAndre Smith from Florida. Schaefer's from either Illinois or Wisconsin. They're our wide receiver recruits. They're good. Then we got the prize before today or yesterday was the 5 offensive linemen. Carson Nielsen, who my nephew taught, had a relationship with at Waterloo West. My nephew's a teacher. He looks great in a football uniform. He's 6'7", weighs 300 pounds, and there's no fat on him. He's a good-looking guy in a football uniform, which means nothing. But he was our highest-rated recruit before today or yesterday.
Yeah.
And then Witters, Linder, and Reardon, and then Hudson Parliament. I call him the House of Parliament. He's like 6'4" and weighs 310 pounds. He looks like Y.A. Black. He looks like a mountain, the way he's built. Big legs, big arms. And he was Gatorade Player of the Year in South Dakota as a junior, So, and that Reardon guy is really good. And Linder's good. And Witters. But offensive linemen, as Jason will say, they're the hardest to predict. Because a lot of them don't play against a bunch of big guys daily in game films, so they're hard to judge.
Right.
Then we got
and that Riordan guy, by the way, you didn't mention that his brother's now been offered a spot on the team.
And he'll come to Iowa.
Yeah.
His brother's, I think, will be a defensive lineman, but who knows? And then the defensive tackle we got out of Minnesota is named Jezierski. And he's built like a man already. He's never gonna be a blazing fast guy, but he's very smart, uses his hands great, and he'll be one of them plugging defensive tackles. By his second year, he'll probably be okay, And then we got the safety who's been committed for quite a while, Marcelo Vitti from Michigan. He was in town again this week, and he was flirting with Michigan State to flip his commitment, but he said no, it's Iowa. He's very fast. He can play wide receiver.
I remember when the rumors about him flipping to Michigan State were
he was out
on the websites.
It wasn't rumors. He put it out in public, and he told Kirk, he said, Michigan State's a local university, and he said the coach at Michigan State, who Kirk really likes, because he's a very upfront guy, wanted to talk to him a lot about please considering Michigan State. And Kirk appreciated it and said, fine. Because I don't know that coach, but he's a good coach. And Kirk respected him. But it was just, he listened to him and, I'm going to Iowa. And he's like, this kid is a real football player. And then we got the kid this week named Hill. He's a cornerback safety. And he looks like a long defensive back that, I don't know. You just got to find out if he's fast enough to be a cornerback or he'll be a safety. And then we got the two linebackers, Case and Thomas, who we've talked about. Case and Thomas looks like, I've been writing about recruiting for a long time. He plays and looks like LeVar Woods. He's like 6'2", 215 pounds, just like LeVar was. And then LeVar grew some when he got into college. Got a little taller than that and put on weight. But they play a lot alike, look a lot alike. LeVar Woods and Seth, that's LeVar's recruiting area. And of course, Seth, he's a linebacker. So our two great assistants, teamed up to get him. And anyway, and of course, now our number one recruit is Julian Manson. He's a 4-star, borderline, maybe higher than a 4-star. And I don't even want to tell you who he reminds me of, but he reminds me of Chad Greenway.
That would be great. Chad Greenway, I used to love him. Oh, my God.
He's 6'4" and weighs 225 pounds. And God, is he a great athlete. He's a great kick returner, punt returner. He could be a mammoth safety like Cam Chancellor of the Seattle Seahawks was, or he could be Chad Greenway, be that guy out at a outside linebacker that can cover people and rush the passer. He could be a cash, he could be a tight end. He could be a wide receiver. He's really, really good. And thank God he came to Iowa. So,
okay.
You want to talk about women's recruits now in basketball?
Let's before we go to the women's recruit, we had a question earlier about the men getting another player for basketball recruit.
I know
is that a
want
sure
one
thing? I know he said in his thing yesterday that they would like to get one if they could.
They did. Every coach said that yesterday in the media, and Ben said that, but I don't think they have I don't think they have a really solid guy yet.
You're
He
probably right.
talked about going the Riley Mulvey route. Remember when Mulvey came to Iowa after his junior year and didn't even go to high school his senior year because of COVID? He said, "What do you call that? Reclassification?" Ben said, "We may get a reclassification guy." But everybody knows Ben wants a big guy. But who is he? Where is he?
Big guy and waiting for next year. Maybe we ask him to reclassify and come up now.
I understand that.
Okay, well, moving on. Let's talk about the women.
He also said they have money to pay somebody.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Which, thank God for Beth.
I don't know if
she quickly raised a lot of money. She quickly raised a lot of money.
But Coach Sash said it, but I don't know if Ben said
it. Yeah, Sash said it.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Can we go to the women?
About the women recruiting a little bit.
Okay. We got 11, 12 recruits. I think Darius Jones from Omaha he's announcing the 5th of July, and Kakert pretty much predicts that he's coming to Iowa. His brother plays for Nebraska, but his other brother, Dallas, is like a journalist in Iowa City. And this kid has been an Iowa fan. And of course, all the Nebraska fans thinks he's going to Nebraska, but Nebraska fans are always, very optimistic about Nebraska. Nebraska fans thinks that Nebraska's going to go to their 15th straight bowl game this year. When they've only been to one bowl in 12 years,
Yeah, last year.
Yeah. But I think recruiting, we're right on target. We usually have by the 10th of July, normally we have 13, 14, 15 recruits.
In football. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're right on that. I think this Jones guy's commits. The exciting thing was the Hester kid from Florida, who's by far the best defensive back we're recruiting. Everybody said he was going to Florida, but after he visited Iowa this weekend, he went home and he said, I think it's a tie. But I just think that kid, he's like a 4 or 5 star cornerback. It's like, I don't think the reason Kirk doesn't have as many commits as he could is he will not pay guys money to come to Iowa if you're a high school kid.
Mm-hmm.
He says you play on a team a year and deserve your money, And and anyway, who cares? Let's say this Hester kid is like a 5 star, and we don't get him because he wants $400,000 or $300,000, whatever a defensive back is worth. So we don't get him. So we sign Riley Moss. And this Hester kid. And the Hester kid never plays much in the NFL, and Riley Moss is a starting cornerback. Right. That's kind of the background of Iowa.
Riley Moss is your typical kid that Iowa likes to recruit, under the radar guys who probably need a little help. But I remember Riley Moss when his first introduction to college football at Iowa. He got burned twice by Purdue.
The fans hated him, and they hated him. They hated him for 2 or 3 years until his senior year. Oh, he's okay. Riley Moss was okay after about his 3rd game.
Yeah.
Like his 2nd game, he picked off 2 passes at Minnesota or something. He got beat once, and then he picked them off. And Riley Moss, people will always give credit to all these. Finding these out of way guys, and they always say Phil does it, and this guy does it, and this guy does it. Reese Morgan still comes into football building almost on a daily basis, and Reese Morgan's the guy that started that. He told Kurt, "Give Josie Jewell a scholarship. Hey, offer Riley Moss as a preferred walk-on." Riley committed as a preferred walk-on. Then he got a scholarship quickly after practice started, I guess. Reese Morgan was just so great, at that. And I wanted to talk about Cash Herrera.
Yes, go for it.
Yeah. Who cares if he went someplace else? He's a 3-star quarterback.
He's at Indiana, I believe.
Yeah, he went to Indiana, and it ain't like he decommitted from Iowa. He wanted to visit the minute he told Kirk that he wanted to visit Indiana, Kirk said, yeah, it's a free world. Go do it. By the way, we're taking away our offer. That's what happened. It wasn't that Indiana flipped an Iowa commit. It's that Kirk pulled the scholarship because the Iowa coaches, it wasn't no big deal if they lost him to them. He's a 3-star.
I'm beginning to wonder if you even want to be a freshman recruited quarterback anymore, because it seems like everybody, including Iowa, hits the portal for quarterbacks now.
14 out of 18 starters in the Big Ten last year at quarterback were transfers. But I do think that Lester and Kirk would love to have a freshman that can play 3 years, and they don't have to go pay a bag of money for somebody.
Well, he said that. He said that his hopes with what they've done, he hopes that they're done digging in the transfer portal.
But Iowa fans, the sky's always falling. Cash Herrera decommitted, which he didn't. He just was visiting other schools, and Kirk is the guy that says, are we married or just holding hands?
Yeah.
And another thing I wanted to mention was that was the Tyler Barnes thing. He put up on Twitter after Herrera, Iowa pulled the scholarship and he was visiting other schools. He put, "You're either with us or against us." And of course, a lot of Iowa fans don't like Tyler Barnes because he's Kirk Ferentz's son-in-law. And then, so the next day I'm listening to a podcast and there's Nick Saban. And he goes, well, he said two things that tied in, well, a bunch of things that tied into Kirk Ferentz, really. He sounded like Kirk Ferentz talking. He said, well, you're either with us or against us. It was like the exact same words that Tyler Barnes used, you know? And anyway, that's why I had Tyler Barnes written down. And it's true. You're either with us. We give you, offer you a scholarship and you commit. You're either with us or you're not. You know?
Now you're starting to sound like Nick Saban.
And Kirk explained in his article with Doctorman, he says, me losing guys in the transfer portal, which Iowa probably loses fewer than any other school in the nation. You know, he said that first day when it happened, Terry Roberts left and Justin Jacobs, and it was like, it bothered him. And then he went to practice the next day and he saw the guys that are his guys. And he said, if you want to leave, leave. These are my guys. I'm going to coach them. Mm-hmm. And he turned right around and signed McNamara and Eric All, who was one of the greatest athletes at tight end Iowa ever had. But Kirk just knew that, hey, that's the way it is. You know, if you want to leave, leave.
So speaking of those two guys, whatever became of Roberts and Jacobs, right? Justin Jacobs. Roberts
made a big mistake. Paul talked about it on your last podcast. Paul's a pretty thoughtful guy.
He is.
He said Terry Roberts made the biggest mistake. He transferred to, I don't know where the hell it was, Miami. Because he was a great special teams guy at Iowa, but he was never going to play in front of Cooper DeJean and Jamari Harris, you know. So he left, but he would have probably played quite a bit at Iowa because some of them guys probably got injured. Mm-hmm. So then he went to Miami and he found out he wasn't good enough to play at Miami. So then he transferred to Michigan State and he was like there 3-4 weeks and now his career's over. If he would have stayed at Iowa, you know, he might be in the NFL, you know, he'd at least got a shot, you know, but anyway.
He fell off the planet of the earth. What about Justin Jacobs?
Well,
didn't he go to like Oregon or something?
He was undrafted. I love Justin. He's the nicest kid, and he's a good kid. He just left. Everybody said he left, went to Oregon because of money. Well, Oregon was always his dream school. They didn't offer him out of high school. It was Iowa and Ohio State, and he come to Iowa, and he was a really good player at Iowa. You know, he built himself up from about 188 pounds to 235 pounds at Iowa, and he was a hell of a player. And when I'm friends with his dad, and, you know, the Iowa coaches love Justin Jacobs. He just went to his dream school, Oregon. Okay. And he was there 2 years because the first year the injury from Iowa kept him out of most of the year. So he got a COVID year and played. Okay. But I think if he'd have stayed at Iowa, he'd have been a second-round draft pick, but he was undrafted.
Yeah. I want you to your next topic is the roster. I want you to talk about that real quick because I gotta go take a bathroom break. So talk as long as you want.
Well, I think the key about the roster is with the cuts. You know, we used to recruit like 10 to 16 walk-ons a year. Well, that's over with. You know, we'd recruit 10 to 16 walk-ons and 10 of them would make it into the next year and everything because you could have 135 people. Now, I think what's going to happen is that you'll have 6 or 7 walk-ons a year, maybe. And the first year, they're either going to cut it or they ain't. And You know, you only got room for 20 walk-ons total out of 5 years. So that's 4 of them each year that are going to make it on average. So that's going to be the way the walk-on roster building, I think, goes. And then, of course, you're down to 105 players. I think the day of when you're signing a scholarship at any university or the University of Iowa, it's not going to be a 4-year guarantee anymore. I think you're going to come in, and if you're disappointing and there's no way you're going to play, Kirk's going to sit you down. And maybe Kirk will be different. Maybe he'll say, no, long as you're working hard, we'll keep you on scholarship and keep you. But I think there's kind of proof in that already. Mr. Rezar wasn't working out as a quarterback, and he isn't on the scholarship roster. And I don't know what he's going to do now, but maybe with this grandfathering in the roster limit, they'll let him, be an extra body this year as one of them extra walk-ons. But I think that's the way roster building is going to be in this new system. It's kind of sad in some ways, but it's just the way you're going to do it. And then you're going to keep probably 5 guys spots open for January or whenever the portal opens, because every team's going to sign some portal guys every year because every team's going to have holes. And of course, maybe some of them guys you sign out of the portal are just replacing guys that go into the portal because the quarterback's going to go into the portal every year. As far as the roster, as far as kind of what I hear and everything, wide receiver room extremely deep, running back room is like stacked. Lester went over, all them groups, and the roster, I think we're pretty good. We're pretty fairly deep at quarterback. I don't know if Lester's got the guy he wants, but I really think this Heslinski guy will be the 3rd quarterback by the middle of the season, probably maybe over Shaggy, because people don't understand that Heklinski, he's only 5'11" or 6 foot tall, probably 6 foot tall, but he was Georgia High School Player of the Year his senior year. If any of you follow high school recruiting, Georgia is like packed with all these great football players.
Yeah.
And Ruggiero said that he was going to be a 4-year starter at Georgia Tech. Well, that's a pretty good hint, that, hey, don't overlook him, in the future. But
could Iowa have 2 100-yard rushers 1,000-yard rushers next year?
It's possible.
Jazz
it's possible.
and Kamari.
Or TJ Washington.
Yeah, keep coming out of nowhere.
They're just loaded. The running back coach today said what he'd really like is to have one back to lean on that does everything. But he said that don't happen very often. He said he'll probably have 2 backs. He said he hates to use more than 3.
Yeah. I know
but
that's what I heard him say that. I also like the fact that he said also in that same podcast is that when he came in, he didn't want to know anything about his running backs. He wanted to learn about them himself, straight up. He didn't want any information being fed to him.
He wanted to give them a fair deal.
Yeah.
Don't come in every year. I always hated high school coaches and stuff that thought they had the high school football team or basketball or baseball team figured out when the kids were in the 8th grade.
Mm-hmm.
Every year should be a new start, but
I also like this KJ Parker. I'm also very high on him, and I think they're very high on him at the at Iowa too. This guy's going to make some noise this year. He
Yeah.
could be
And
he might end up being our number one wide receiver.
it kind of
That's how I'm willing to
surprised.
go out on a limb.
Yeah, like he has to be a little more. Kirk just criticized him for one thing in the spring game. He said he jumped off sides twice. He said, "How the hell does a wide receiver jump off sides?" You know, all you got to do is stand out there and look at the ball, and when the ball is snapped, you move. You know, but anyway, that was kind of funny.
I think he was just anxious to show what he could do.
I kind of liked it that Lester went over all the wide receivers and just, he likes them, and the defensive guys. Pat Anger said today, he said he couldn't believe it. He said usually in spring practice, he said the defense just looked so much better than offense. And he said this year it was 50-50. There was receivers catching 15, 20, 25-yard passes, which you never see at Iowa. So I think things are clicking. I hope so. I hope it doesn't mean the defense is bad.
Me too.
We never have a bad defense.
Move on.
Oh, there was something I wanted to.
We got Nick Saban, Lane Giffith,
and
Urban Meyer.
One thing that Barnett said.
Okay.
That I wanted to mention was.
Okay.
This Allgaier kid whose dad played at Iowa, Ken Allgaier, offensive lineman. I think he's from Kansas or Missouri. Allgaier, true freshman. He early enrolled. Barnett just raved about him already. Usually nobody that walks into the building does any coach rave about on the offensive line. He said, and this kid just follows Jennings Dunker around and tries to do everything Jennings Dunker does. Wasn't that a good hint?
Yep.
The only true freshman offensive lineman, Kirk said, that was good from day one was Brian Bulaga. And Bulaga started right off at Iowa he was either 16 or 17 years old. And he only played 3 years at Iowa. And then he was the left tackle the right tackle for the Green Bay Packers in the Super Bowl his first year. So
I thought you were going to say Brian Ferentz was the only good lineman.
No, Brian really struggled. He really struggled. Because he was not no great athlete or anything, but turned into a hell of a football player for Iowa. What was the next topic?
Urban Meyer, Nick Saban, and Lane Giffin.
I explained to you today, I don't really like listening to podcasts where they don't have an expert on. And to me, an expert is Nick Saban. Right? An expert is Urban Meyer. An expert is Lane Kiffin and Sarkisian. If they have Kirk on, that's an expert. Beth Seth or Phil Parker on, that's an expert. You know what I mean? So anyway, they had Saban on, and I think I already said the quote about you're either with us or against us. And then he said at Alabama, he said, everybody thinks that we recruited 4 or 5 stars. He said, I recruited a lot of guys that were like 2 and 3 stars, but as soon as we offered them, the recruiting services jumped them up to a 4-star just because we offered them, which that happens with Iowa quite a bit. Mm-hmm. Jack Campbell was a 2-star, and then Iowa gets him committed, and all of a sudden he's a 3 or 4-star. Cooper DeJean was a 2-star. Iowa gets him to commit way early. And all of a sudden, by his senior year, he's a 4-star. But he said, what we do, and it's like he was like listening to Kirk over and over again. He says, what we do, and he says, I told the guys as soon as they come on the campus at Alabama, you don't know nothing. He said, we are going to develop you every day. They didn't talk about winning championships. It was like work every day, develop and get better and put in the effort and work. It was like listening to Kirk. And then he said, one thing he said that reminded me of Hayden Fry. He don't he don't practice his ones against ones like Kirk does.
Mm-hmm.
And Lane Kiffin talked about that, where he was the offensive coordinator and he's running the twos against the number one's defense at Alabama, and he'd run a reverse or some play that tricked the defense, and Saban would just tear his ass. And that's what Kurt Hayden would do. He wanted his number ones on each side of the ball to build up confidence. And if you made them look bad in practice, that was not good. You know, Hayden was a master psychologist. He thought his number ones should think they're the best, you know. And I know Kirk about got fired one time for putting a number one Ron Hallstrom up against Mark Bortz. And he wasn't supposed to put a first team guy up against the first team defense. And Hayden threatened to fire him right on the field that day. But, and then the other thing was that reminded me of Caleb Johnson was Derrick Henry. Saban talked about him, that he come in and here's this big, fast guy, and he couldn't play football. He couldn't block. He couldn't hit the right hole. He couldn't remember any plays. And Derrick Henry, you know, Saban was chewing his ass, and Derrick Henry acted like he was going to lie. And he said to coach, he said, you don't understand. In high school, we didn't run plays. They didn't tell me what to do. They just pitched the ball back to me and told me to run. So he had to learn. And that's the way Caleb Johnson was. He couldn't block. He couldn't block till last year at the end of the season, you know, and he couldn't run plays right. And that's why he was in the doghouse.
Yeah. And I'm going to stop you right there.
You can't get your quarterback killed, you know?
Yeah.
So.
True. Yeah. Let me say this real quick. Hank wants to know if there's any intel on men's basketball. I believe that all the intel would be on those videos. If you go on YouTube, there's a ton of video with the coaches and the players, and they'll probably tell you anything you want to know, but that's the only intel I got. What about you?
I just know who's on the roster, and
yeah,
you know,
that's all we got. And then Hawkaholic Brandon says, I hate to say it, but I don't think Peyton Sanford will get drafted. No, he's not going to get drafted. Is that tonight or tomorrow night?
No, you don't get, for one thing, you don't get drafted when you got two dislocated shoulders. So that's a big deal is health, you know, when you go get them physicals, you know. And that was terrible that Peyton had to go through that his senior year. So anyway, and a hurt wrist, but anyway.
All right.
But
you want to talk about Georgia next. I'm going to try to push you through a little bit quicker because we're going on.
The only thing was Georgia was that was my Urban Meyer thing.
Okay.
Urban Meyer put out the video. He said, you know, the SEC better start scheduling 9 conference games like the Big Ten, or there's not going to be an agreement on this new 16-team playoffs.
Yeah.
And he said, look at Georgia. And he went down through their non-conference schedule of their 4 non-conference games. And the only team that was any better than UMass or something was Georgia Tech, who's that's a game at the end of the season. Georgia Tech is not a power, you know. And he said out of the 12 games they got, 9 of them are at home. He said, come on, SEC, you know. And I know Alabama and Texas are scheduling some pretty good teams. But, yeah, if you want to have this new agreement, you know, fall into line. The Big Ten plays 9 conference games, you know, and don't be telling me the SEC is that much better than the Big Ten that they can't play 9 conference games.
Yeah. Vandy Chris will give you stats and stuff that says that us playing the 8 games we play a tougher game tougher
And
schedule than the
you
Big
know,
Ten.
this ain't an SEC podcast, and I didn't
I know
really,
it.
but that's why I put in Urban Meyer. It was like, you know, I listened to that one podcast you guys had, and he said Michigan wasn't any good. Well, Michigan beat Alabama 2 years in a row, and Michigan wasn't even a top half of the Big Ten team, really.
No.
You know, if Iowa would have played Michigan last year, wouldn't the odds makers made Iowa a favorite?
I think they would have made Michigan a favorite just because of past history.
Michigan,
But I think we could have beat them.
Michigan had the worst quarterbacking in the Big Ten, worse than us.
I know it.
You know,
But
it
you know
was
what?
awful.
They beat Ohio State, the national champs.
I know. And then I said, you know, the guy that almost got fired last year was Ryan Day. When he lost to Michigan, I know a lot of people in the Ohio State athletics, and Ryan Day really needed to at least get to the national championship game to keep his job. And that was a fact. You know, you don't lose to Michigan every year. And wasn't, you know, it was like, yeah. So
Okay.
Ohio
You're,
State didn't even get to the Big Ten championship game last year, but they won the national championship. And Ryan Day's a good coach, but that
All
was
right.
what's the next subject?
Women's and men's basketball. Anything you want to say
Okay.
about that?
Not really about men's. We had some questions about men's. I just think we have a terrific coach now who obviously, if you watch them videos, they coach defense.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, I was just back. I told Hank, and he mentioned that he's going to go watch now. So yeah, that's all you got to do is sit down and watch all those videos. You'll find out everything you want to know.
And I remember why I said that.
What?
Because they asked Ben about, you guys thinking about going to the Final Four this year? And Ben goes, no, but the Iowa women are thinking about it because they got a great team. He goes, we don't think about even talking about winning one game. You know, again, he sounded like Nick Saban and Kirk Ferentz. He said, we think about coming in every day, working hard, learning discipline, culture, weightlifting, getting in shape, and to be the best we can be every day and get better every day. But then I got to thinking, boy, he thinks the Iowa women could go to the Final Four. And then I got to thinking, and I texted you. I said, did you know that everybody on our roster except 2 people were top 100 recruits? That hasn't happened at Iowa since Vivian Stringer was here.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah. Well, one thing too, I wanted to ask you: did you see the thing today where they're going to let the this year they're going to let the men expand from 31 games to 32 games next?
Yeah, one more game.
Yeah, they're adding one more. Here's my question to you: do the Big Ten try to go for 21 games?
I hope not.
I hope not too.
That
was my first thought was Big Ten will probably just say, hey, you guys can't schedule any non-conference game. We're going to add one more game to the Big Ten.
I liked it. The punting is winning. I listen to them all the time. And by the way, guys, I didn't mention Budmeyer to rub it against you guys or anything, because I know they don't like Budmeyer. They want Kirk to get out of there and all that shit. But anyway, on there, they had a question they talked about. How would you set up this college football conferences different? And I came up with the idea to have, what was it? 7 conferences of 9 teams, I think it was. Or was it 10? 10. No. It might have been 7 conferences of 10 teams or something. And I said, everybody in each conference play everybody in their conference. And then they could play a rivalry game also. I said, that way there would be, of course, there wouldn't be a Big 10 with 20 teams, you know. But then I said, then the 2 top teams, you'd know who the best one in the each conference was. That's the way I would do it instead of all this scheduling easy people and everything. But anyway, on to Iowa women's basketball. I wanted to point out that our 2026 recruits are Velisco, Lewis, Jenica Lewis, Harpring, and Bjorn. All them guys are top 10 players. I don't know if we get one or two of them. Hopefully. I feel real good about Velisco. And I hope Jenica Lewis, the hometown girl, comes, you know.
It
And
would be great
Bjorn's
if
her
we could
best
get the
friend.
hometown girl. I'm
Yeah,
still
then
hoping
the
for
other-
Harping.
The other ones that I got written down are also all 5 stars. Biles and Trinity Jones and Kuso, who's from Wisconsin, but I've kind of tossed. Biles is the only one I think that's kind of on the radar other than them top 4. Then in 2027, today we offered Eve Long. And then there's the gal I think that will come to Iowa is a 6'4" post, Destiny Manyow. Her brother's on the team at Iowa.
Oh, okay. I wondered why that name sounded familiar.
Yeah. And anyway, she's
where's she from?
6'4", 4-star. I follow her on Instagram. Her brother, when she got the Iowa offer, he goes, "I know where you're going." Like that. He got the offer from Iowa.
Is that
And then,
26 or 27?
And then the other one who's a great player is McGinry. And so those are the 2027. And 2028, I got 2 stars penciled in. One was a new one before it went on the air, Leah DeWitt from Marietta, Georgia. Molly can go watch her. And then LaChloe Johnson from Minnesota. Them 2 people are like, they're going to be top 10 players probably.
We could send Molly to watch Harping too, and see if we can get her.
I know
that because of her shoe company or gear company that she's sponsored by. She's no longer really I don't think she's ever coming to Iowa.
No, I found out afterwards when I can't remember whether she was with Adidas or where the hell she was with, and I was a Nike. That don't matter.
It doesn't.
You know, there's plenty of girls at Iowa that were Adidas people and stuff, and they came to Iowa.
But they wore Nike gear, right?
When you're at Iowa, you do. I don't know if you got to wear Nike shoes or not, but yeah, the Hawkeye gear you wear and uniforms are Nike.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, we can quit worrying about, that a high school girl is getting paid by Adidas or something. So
okay. All right.
I was worried about
Final
that.
Topic is Bo Basset.
Yeah. You know what I heard?
Did you hear anything? Stuff out there? Go ahead and tell folks.
I heard that they wanted them to wrestle with the Hawkeye Wrestling Club,
mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether brands like that or not, but what they wanted to do, this is what I heard. So you can quote me, but I don't know whether it was true. They wanted the University of Iowa to fly them 3 brothers. Bassett's got a brother 2 years younger than him, and then he's got a foster brother who's unbelievable,
Yeah.
And anyway, thought
his
all
name's
3 of them
Miller,
were
I believe.
And anyway, they wanted the University of Iowa to fly him from Ohio into practice with the Hawkeye Wrestling Club and fly him home. And Brand said, I don't think that's legal. NCAA rules.
Yeah. Not only is it not legal, but they have to have a training facility within 250 miles of their home. If they don't, then they can apply to.
Yeah.
But we already know that if they're from Ohio State, they probably have Penn State within 250 miles. If they're from or Ohio State was probably 250 miles away.
Yeah. Now
so
they say
they would have to go
3
there first of those schools to train.
They say that them 3 guys, now it's Oklahoma State, Nebraska, and Penn State, but I just couldn't understand. The rumor was they going to give him $5 million to come to Iowa. Can't you pay for your own plane ticket?
Yeah.
But
Well, this Melvin Miller is, I guess, as you said, it's his foster
he's
brother.
He's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
they said that Tom Brand said that, according to some of the stories out there. Now we don't know if these are true or not. That he would only do it if Melvin would commit right on the spot, and Melvin didn't want to commit yet. But
I don't know.
He would have probably come to Iowa had Bo Basset not left.
Yeah, there's a lot of rumors.
Yeah, you don't know what's going on. There's a lot of stuff going on out there. Everybody thinks they've got the inside story.
After these kids just choose where they're wrestling, and after they're wrestling, I'm sure brands will say. At this point, it'd be stupid to say much publicly.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. He can't anyway because they're recruits. He cannot talk about.
The thing I don't like about our wrestling program is all the guys I know are so that know stuff about the wrestling program won't even tell you. It's like this closed thing. What do you think of Tom Brands? Oh, he's great. What do you think of the Brands? What do you hear? Do you know if Bo Basset got all this money? That's secret. It's like you can't get any information, or there's never anybody that's an ex-Iowa wrestler or anything. They never say anything to tell you, like if there's anything that's going wrong in the program or anything, which maybe there's nothing going wrong.
Yeah. Here's what scares me, though. If these three end up at Nebraska, I mean, you want to go to Oklahoma State? Go. You want to go to Penn State? Go, because they already have a superior program to us. But don't go to Nebraska because they're a program on the rise, and I don't want them looking down at us.
That's just the way it is. I'm sure Iowa State didn't like it when Gary Kirtlemeyer brought them up to even with Iowa State, and then Dan Gable
snag Dan Gable
took it to the heights. But that's just the way it is.
Yeah. Iowa State should have never let Kale get away.
Yeah, I was impressed watching Nebraska guys wrestle. Now they got Ferrari. They got the Ferrari kid who's an immense talent.
Yeah, we could have brother against brother if they wrestle at the same weight.
Well, Ferrari's gonna wrestle heavyweight. He's gonna be taking it to Ben Keeter. I think so. Anyway, that's what I heard anyway. Oh God, did this thing go a long time or
2 hours? Almost.
Oh Jesus! Now you owe me big money. You owe me big money. Big money,
guys. All right, here we go, guys. If you made it this far, congratulations. I appreciate it. Okay. Now, if you haven't already hit that subscribe button, hit it now. Hit the like button. It's right there in front of you. Do it now. Comment. You can leave a comment after the show. I go back and I usually say something to people who leave comments. And by all means, share it to some friends. If you kind of enjoyed our thing tonight. And then Sunday night, I'll be back with Jason and Paul. We're going to do our Iowa preview. We might do a little prediction. We're going to do 2 deep predictions. And that will be Jason's last show. I got permission to tell everybody that Jason is, I'm not going to tell you why it's his last show, but I got permission to tell you guys that he will not be on after this Sunday. He's
one other thing, Dean. It'll take me 30 seconds to say it. Was I didn't mention Politsky, the new defensive coach from the NFL who used to be a grad assistant at Iowa. And he's now, and the player interviews, the defensive backs all went ballistic over how great he is and everything. I'm predicting that, when Phil finally does retire, maybe Phil will coach till he's 70, I don't know. But when he does retire or Seth moves on or something, I think that this guy will probably slide in.
Yeah, Phil is completely loyal, and Phil will stay as long as Kirk does.
That's what we hear,
Yeah, he's completely
I
loyal.
was hoping if Seth became the head coach, Phil would help Seth for a year or two,
Hmm.
but
Yeah,
I
we'll
don't
see
know.
how that goes.
Anyway,
All
I'm
right,
sorry
this is a
I
good time to
was
get
so
out of here.
long. Sorry it took so
This is
long
fine.
tonight.
I
Yep.
knew when I agreed to do this with you, it was going to be a minimum 2-hour show. All right, take care, everybody. Thank
Yep.
you for watching this long.
Yep.
I will never be free now, my baby, no, no.